We are going to talk about starvation in Gaza, a man-made famine that was deliberately created by Israel's government and its war criminal leader, adding yet more crimes against what was once called human rights. This war criminal leader has been sealing Gaza's border, cutting off food, water, and humanitarian aid. Calling it a man-made almost feels wrong, because such an act is foreign to both masculinity and humanity, and no conscience should ever allow such an act through silence. For the last 22 months, our conscience has been forcibly introduced to a new genocidal weapon. Since October 7th, it has grown used to watching stones and wreckage falling over children's heads. But now it has been forced to watch children tying stones around their stomachs just to silence their hunger. Oxfam, Doctors Without Borders, Amnesty International, and more than 100 aid organizations condemned Israel's weaponization of aid, saying it was blocking life-saving assistance from entering Gaza. As of the 5th of September, the known number of people who have starved to death according to Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza reached at least 376 people, including 134 children. And we are only talking about the known number. And before we dive in, let me explain some terminology that might be unfamiliar. The IPC, which stands for the Integrated Food Security Classification, is a global standard used by the UN, NGOs, humanitarian agencies and researchers to measure and classify food insecurity. The IPC has 5 phases. Phase 1, minimal. In phase 1, an essential food and non-food needs appear without resorting to destructive strategies. Phase 2, stressed. In this phase, families can barely manage food but struggle with other basic essentials. Phase 3, crisis. In the crisis phase, food consumption gaps appear, malnutrition rises, and families might be forced to sell what little they have to survive. Phase 4, emergency. By the emergency phase, you can observe the high widespread of food gaps and the very high malnutrition. Phase 4 requires an urgent action. Phase 5, famine, which is the highest and the worst phase of food insecurity. This phase is accompanied by mass starvation, death, and collapse of life.
Israel is presented as though we are applying a campaign of starvation in Gaza. What a bold-faced lie. There is no policy of starvation in Gaza, and there is no starvation in Gaza. We enable humanitarian aid throughout the duration of the war to enter Gaza, otherwise there would be no Gazans. And what has interdicted the supply of humanitarian aid is one force, Hamas. Again, the reversal of truth. Hamas robs, steals this humanitarian aid, and then accuses Israel of not supplying it.
The IPC has confirmed the famine in the Gaza governorate, where conditions in North Gaza, including cities like Beit Hanun and Jabalia, are believed to be as just severe, if not worse. The IPC reported that it was unable to provide the full food security classification for North Gaza due to the lack of access and the limited data. This highlights the urgent need for assessments in the area. In Rafah in the south, the IPC was also unable to conduct analysis due to the widespread devastation and the fact that the city has been largely depopulated by Israeli military operations. According to the IPC's snapshot, as of August 15th, more than 281,000 people in the Gaza governorate Around 30% of the population are living under phase 5 famine conditions, the highest and the most severe level of food insecurity. In addition, over 468,000 people, about half of the governorate's population, were classified as experiencing phase 4 emergency conditions. And the outlook is grim, as famine conditions are expected to expand into Deir al-Balah in central Gaza and Khan Yunis in the south by the end of September. The human body depends on glucose from food to survive. When food becomes scarce, it first burns the fat to keep the heart alive. But with prolonged hunger, the body begins shutting down, organ failure sets in, and death can follow. Extended malnutrition also clouds the mind, making it hard to think or even speak, disrupting daily life. Children are the most vulnerable. Starvation rapidly harms their developing bodies and fragile organs. In Gaza, where severe food shortages have dragged on for months, more and more images show children slipping into the red zone on MUAC tapes, which is a tool that measures the upper arm to assess malnutrition. A measurement below 11.5 centimeters signals severe acute malnutrition. Children at this level need an urgent treatment. Without it, the risk of death is extremely high. According to Al Jazeera, as of August 5, 2025, at least 440 people have died from starvation, including 147 children. But you can doubt that because this reflects only the documented cases. The real toll may be far higher, but there is one fact you cannot doubt. Gaza today is the deadliest place in the world for children. And when speaking of the deadliest places on earth, Gaza is the deadliest place for journalists. Those who risk everything just to bring us the truth. But some pens weigh too heavy on guilty hearts. They were and are innocent. Their mics and cameras were and will be shooting only one thing: the heavy caliber of truth. So what had the US done about this designated starvation, as Israel was not allowing food supplies from the UN, Egypt, Jordan, or anywhere else? Pointed to a new Israeli-approved organization, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF, as the supposed answer to the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. This came at a time when Israel had blocked United Nations officials and humanitarian groups from bringing in aid. The GHF was backed by both Israel and the US, claiming it would take charge of distributing aid inside Gaza. It presented itself as an organization experienced in providing humanitarian support during natural disasters, and now repurposed to oversee Gaza's food distribution. I'm not going to dive deep into how the GHF was complicit in war crimes. I will let a US veteran tell you about it.
So who is like giving the orders for all the GHF operations?
Great question, sir. I was told very explicitly, directly to my face, that our client is the IDF.
Your client is the IDF.
Our client is the IDF. And this came out in a discussion once where I was in the control room. I was on I was on control room duty that day. We had shifted responsibilities on a rotational base. So I was in there that day with the radio observing site number 2 distribution. A Palestinian man had picked up some children to let them step on his shoulders to get onto a berm because they were being crushed in the crowd. Site 2 is very small, smallest of all 4 sites. And these children are being crushed, and he picked them up there and put them up on the berm. And the Israeli Defense Forces liaison officer in the main control center with us comes up to the screen that I'm watching, and he says, "Tell your men to get them down." I was like, "We got this under control." I was like, "I know they know what they're doing. No, they're children. Let's calm down. Mm-hmm. Get them down now, or I will." Well, there's no IDF on the site, so I didn't take it as much of like, much more than just being, bombastic and like, okay, like, hey, we got this. He leaves and goes to his desk in the operations center, and he gets on the radio and he speaks something on the radio. It was in Hebrew. I don't speak Hebrew. One of the contractors that was there was American that did speak Hebrew, and he notifies me. He said, hey, he just told the snipers at the IDF position, because the site number 2 is co-located with an Israeli base. He said, he just told the snipers to take these kids out. I was like, on the radio? He's like, yeah. This lieutenant colonel then comes back up and he says, get them down. And I look at him and I say, did you just call on the radio and tell your men to shoot them? And he said, I'm going to take care of this if you don't. I said, you are not going to shoot. You are not going to shoot children. You're also not going to shoot, because if your men miss, you're going to hit others. You're not going to shoot. Thank God we didn't come to the conclusion of figuring out whether he would or not, because the children jumped down and ran off of the site. They didn't want to be there. They were unarmed. They didn't have shoes. One wasn't even wearing a shirt. They were starving. The chief operations officer for Safe Reach Solutions, our higher headquarters, so to speak, in the contract, beckoned me outside with him, and he looked at me in the face and he said, never say no to the client. And I asked him, I was like, I didn't know the client was in there. Who's here? Did Johnny Moore come to visit?
Right.
And he said, no, the IDF. I was like, the IDF are our client? He said, yes, we work for them.
I know that the majority of people are facing the so-called compassion fatigue, and the kind of numbness that comes from seeing too much horror. People feel powerless. They scroll away, they escape reality instead of facing it. But at the end, I want to turn my words to the conscience of the people of the United States, because history will remember what you are allowing through your government's policies. Your government is directly fueling a war that threatens not only Gaza, but also Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. The US regime claims to find justification for this conflict and keeps supporting it with billions of dollars. And your government represents you even if you don't agree with its policy. But warlords justified their crimes throughout history, and conflicts kept happening throughout history as well. And keep in mind that I told you in the beginning, it's about human rights. But when human rights are stripped away, when dignity is erased, that's when the devil wins. So history will write that the US was finalizing and supporting the fracture of the human rights. And your government represents you, even if you don't agree with its policy. And if you don't agree with its policy, then you must stop it by all the possible peaceful means. And of course, you have the choice of staying silent, but your silence will feed genocide. Your silence will feed the weaponization of aid. Your silence will spill more blood. Your silence will silence a child. Your silence will burn innocent hope. Your silence is inhumane. Your silence will crown the devil. Fuck the devil.